So Zershu, you know that Professor Cheng will go first, right?
We're live on YouTube.
Okay. So are we live streaming?
Yes.
Paul and Alan, you can start the recording. And I will start now. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to another International Manifesto Group webinar, this time on the Communist Manifesto at 175. My name is Radhika Desai. I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group and will be your moderator today. As the Communist Manifesto turns 175 years old, the world could not be riper for the revolution that it predicted and called for. The contradictions of a senile, ailing, and decaying capitalism are maturing alarmingly into a putrescence of sharpening economic crisis and want, deepening public health and ecological emergencies, social division, political breakdown, and above all, war and nuclear war. While this is making the manifesto more relevant than ever, many still hurl the question at us. If Marx and Engels were so smart, if the Communist Manifesto was so penetrating, how come the revolution they predicted and called for has yet to occur? The answer lies in the actually occurring revolutions of Eastern revolutions and non-European revolutions. However, we can only read that answer when we dispense with the lenses of Eurocentric Western Marxism, which distort text as well as history. What we see through these lenses claims that Marx and Engels were wrong in critical ways. They were wrong to analyze capitalism as contradictory value production, or to claim that profit rates tended to fall in the long run, or that they did not say certain things. For example, that capitalism was contradictory and suffered from crisis-generating demand deficits, when in fact Marx insisted on little else in capital. Such Western Marxists swagger as impossibly radical Marxists in the academy today, while actually performing the invaluable service to the establishment
Adele, someone like you, Queen.
Okay, sorry, I'll continue. Such Western Marxists swagger as impossibly radical Marxists in the academy today, while actually performing the invaluable service to the establishment of being avowed Marxists who declared that Marx and Engels were either wrong or irrelevant. The relevance of the manifesto can only become clear if we abandon the path of compromise with capitalism and imperialism trodden by Western Marxism and strike out along the path blazed by those who actually made revolutions and confronted the real world dilemmas. These people recast themselves as communists. These people and these forces recast themselves as communists to put clear blue water between themselves and the Western Marxist path. This communist path is one along which the International Manifesto Group travels. It is also winning more and more converts from those who are confronting the dead ends of Western Marxism. Specifically, with regard to the Communist Manifesto, we see at least three major distortions. First of all, there is the lionization of capitalism, based on cherry-picking certain passages from Chapter 1, where Marx and Engels describe how capitalism has sharpened the class struggle to an historically unprecedented extent, and then go on to talk about the most revolutionary part that the bourgeoisie has played in this transformation. And there we read passages such as these: the bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, and idyllic relations, etc. That the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instrument of production. That all fixed and fast frozen relations with their ancient trains of venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away, etc. All that is solid melts into air, etc. From such passages, Western Marxists construct not a Marx interpretation, but a Schumpeterian interpretation, in which capitalism is capable of infinite development of the productive capacity of human social labor, undeterred by its contradictions. This Schumpeterian interpretation attributes the prosperity of the homelands of capitalism to capitalism's allegedly prodigious productivity, while observing an omerta on the imperialism which has made such a critical contribution to the prosperity of the West. The second distortion, which is the related dismissal of the immiseration thesis. The numerous references to the misery of the proletariat in the manifesto is supposed, on the one hand, to be attributed only to the technological advances of a Promethean capitalism, and not to the predatory and extractive operations of imperialism. They are also supposed to have been nullified given the relative prosperity of the proletariat in the homelands of capitalism, particularly after the Second World War, ignoring the misery into which working people around the world are thrown to this day. While the immiseration thesis is dismissed by refusing to see capitalism's worldwide, that is to say, imperial reach, the same reach is recognized by Western Marxists to proclaim Marx and Engels as the original or ur-theorists of globalization, peddling an understanding of the capitalist world as seamlessly unified by markets, in which national states, boundaries, and economies don't matter. But beyond the favorite passages of the Western Marxists, the Communist Manifesto itself, not to speak of the rest of Marx and Engels' vast oeuvre, contain plenty that underlines the centrality of the nation state and imperialism to capitalism, and how also underline that anti-imperialism is critical to the unfolding of capitalism. We have passages such as where Marx and Engels describe how capitalism requires political centralization, where independent but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation become lumped together into one nation, with one government, one code of laws, one national interest, one frontier, one customs tariff. We read about how, though not in substance yet in form, the struggle of the proletariat with the bourgeoisie is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all, settle matters with its own bourgeoisie. We read about how the bourgeoisie finds itself in constant battle, not only with the aristocracy or with other sections of the bourgeoisie, but all the time with the bourgeoisie of foreign countries. We read how the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself as the nation, etc. And finally, we read about how, in proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another will also be put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within nations vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. So in conclusion, let me say that it is true, of course, as Marx and Engels so famously said, that philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. But I think they would agree that revolutionaries cannot change the world unless they interpret it fairly accurately. That is why it is critical to read the manifesto without the distorting lenses that abound around us, and by looking at it through the lenses of actually occurring revolutions against capitalism and what is inseparable from it, imperialism, on the ultimate testing ground of any theory, and that is history. So with that, let me open up to our speakers. We have a really distinguished array of speakers who are going to speak. The first of our speakers will be Professor Cheng Enfu, who can't be here today, and his speech will be presented by Dr. Zhishu Liu, who works at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Let me briefly introduce Professor Cheng. Professor Cheng is an academician at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, director of the Research Center for Economic and Social Development, principal professor at the University of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, president of the World Association for Political Economy, president of the Chinese Society for Foreign Economic Theories, and a member of the People's Congress of China. So Dr. Liu will now present Professor Cheng's speech.
Hi, thank you, Radhika.
You have to show the video. You have to show the video, right?
Yes, I will. And just first of all, good night, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. And again, I will be presenting on behalf of Professor Cheng Enfu, and the way I'm doing it, I will be showing Professor Cheng Enfu's video streaming without his voice in Chinese, and I'm presenting on behalf in English. So here's the I will need a second to upload the video again. Okay, here's the share screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Today, the title of my presentation is The Essence of Capital, of Das Kapital, and its Contemporary Value. The capitalist world has changed dramatically since the publication of Capital. But this work of Marx has not become obsolete.
Where is that?
When the world faces a major dilemma or encounters a major setback, Marx always reappears in a new way. And people always look to Das Kapital to find a way out of the global problems of today. As long as capitalism and the market economy exist, capital as a work that reveals its mysteries and economic laws is unlikely to leave the stage. As a Marxist encyclopedia, the methodology and the principles contained in Capital still shine with the light of truth and practical significance. First, Capital provides a scientific approach to understanding societies. In Capital, Marx organically integrates philosophy with economics, applies dialectics to the study of political economy, and has historical materialism and dialectics highly unified in the analysis of the evolution of the life and death of the capitalist market economy. Capital is mainly a study of the economic mode of capitalist society. Marx regarded the development of society as the result of contradictory movements and believed that the law of contradictory movements of the productive forces and the relations of production, as well as that of the economic base and superstructure, is the general law of development of human society and its fundamental driving force. It determines the change of social formation and the basic trend of historical development. Marx analyzed the operation and development of capitalist economy by applying the law of unity of opposites, the law of qualitative and quantitative changes, and the law of the negation, as well as methodologies such as class analysis. He studied the process of capitalist social and economic development by applying the scientific findings of historical materialism and came to the scientific conclusion that capitalist system is not eternal, but is bound to be replaced as the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of production evolves. To date, there is no theory in mainstream Western economics that is comparable to capital in terms of understanding the reality and development of the contemporary world. I recently edited a textbook titled New Political Economy. The English version of it will be published soon. It is a synthesis of Marx' Das Kapital and his planned 6 volumes on political economy, creating a new system of 5 processes in modern political economy. I wish that this textbook may be available to you in some way, since your comments and suggestions would be very valuable. Second, in Das Kapital, Marx establishes the subject status of workers. Labor theory is at the core of capital, and is a line running through historical materialism, political economy, and scientific socialism, which is of great significance to the world today in terms of firmly establishing the subject position of workers in the creation of wealth and value. Marx once pointed out that as long as society does not yet revolve around labor as the earth around the sun, it can never reach a state of equilibrium. Marx's comparison of labor to the sun is sufficient for us to see the position of labor in his thought. Labor is the core of the Marxist paradigm and system. Not only does labor determine and condition the structure, nature, and appearance of a society, but the labor conditions would determine the conditions of human development. Marx presents the labor theory of value in Capital, arguing that living labor is the only source of value creation, making it the cornerstone of the theory of surplus value, and on that basis proposed the idea of labor emancipation. Even under the increasingly mature digital economy today, intelligent economy, and other high-tech conditions, as long as it is in a capitalist society or in a capitalist enterprise in a socialist country centering on private capital, labor would still be characteristic of the dependence on things. Workers be enslaved by private capital, and various forms of alienation persist. In future society, where the factors of production are publicly owned, labor will become the sun. That is, labor will be completely liberated, thus truly realizing the free and comprehensive development of human beings. We must always stand in the position of international working people, establish a view in our value system that respects labor and workers, insist on the subject position of workers in social development and wealth creation, and refute the absurd statement of exploitation creates wealth that has been so long popular among people. Third, in Capital, it clarifies the contradictory movement of capital. The theory on capital as a key term in Marx's works is one of the three main categories throughout the book, that is labor, capital, and surplus value, and is of great importance to our understanding of the nature and the role of capital in the context of globalization. Capital is a product of a certain stage of human history. It is a historical category. Capital is a factor of production, a value that can bring surplus value. Capital in essence is not a thing, but a certain social and economic relationship, which in turn must be manifested through things. This gives rise to a double logic, a logic of creating material and economic civilization by the power of things, and a logic of value added with pursuit of profit maximization. From private capital to private monopoly capital, national monopoly capital, and then to international monopoly capital, the expansionist nature of capital keeps driving forward the process of economic globalization, which constantly intensifies the globalization of production, trade, finance, and business operation with an ever more greedy capital today that is based on private appropriation and characterized by virtual capital. The unlimited expansion of such capital has led to the intensification of the basic contradictions of capitalism in all countries and the whole world, with widening gap between rich and poor in wealth and income distribution within and between countries, leading to increasingly serious global problems. Under the conditions of China's socialist market economy, while attaching importance to the role of public capital, we must pay close attention to overcoming the greedy nature and the disorderly expansion and monopoly of non-public capital. The relationship between capital and labor as social axis must be well handled, and making various forms of capital better serve the national economy and people's livelihood. Fourth, in Capital, it reveals the laws of development of market economy. In Capital, Marx has scientifically explained many economic laws of human society, such as the general law of commodity production, the common law of socialized mass production, the law of economic globalization, and the world market. The laws of capitalist economic operation are systematically analyzed, which covers wage, cost, profit, credit, interest, land rent, reproduction, virtual capital, and virtual economy, economic cycle, and crisis. All these provide guidance for a correct understanding of the laws operation of socialist market economy. Fifth, Marx's ideas in Capital must be applied in a flexible manner in practice. At present, we must resolutely oppose private monopoly capital, international financial monopoly capitalism, and neoliberalism, and neo-imperialism. Work together to actively safeguard the rights and the welfare of the working class and the working people at large. Resist the US-led West's efforts to contain the peaceful development of China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and Syria, etc., and bring into better play the economic role of progressive third world countries such as China. Today, China has become a major trading partner of more than 140 countries and regions, ranking first in the world in total trade in goods and leading the world in attracting foreign investment and outbound investment. Between 2012 and 2021, China's gross domestic product grew from 54 trillion yuan to 114.9 trillion yuan, accounting for 18.5% of the world economy and firmly ranking second in the world. In 2021, China's total GDP at market exchange rates reaches $17.8 trillion, equivalent to 77% of the US GDP. Between 2013 and 2021, China's average contribution to total global economic growth reaches 38.6%, more than the combined contribution of the G7 members. China has signed more than 200 cooperation documents with 151 countries and 32 international organizations to build the Belt and the Road. The Belt and Road Initiative will lift 7.6 million people out of extreme poverty, increase global trade by 1.7 to 6.2%, and increase global income by 0.7% to 2.9%. Currently, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has grown from 57 founding members to 106 members from 6 continents, making it the second largest international multilateral development institution in the world. The above achievements have been made through the dominant role of China's state-owned capital, collective capital, and equity-based cooperative capital. In light of that, I would argue, as in an already published paper of mine, that China has got rid of its dependent and semi-dependent position in the world economic system and is now in a quasi-center position and will reach the center by 2035. By 2050, it will achieve a status of one of the top countries in the center, completing the 3 major tasks of China, i.e. Chinese modernization, reunification of the mainland and Taiwan of China, and international anti-hegemonic struggle. That's all I want to say here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Cheng Enfu and to Dr. Zheshu Liu, who presented Professor Cheng's presentation. Before I go on, just a couple of housekeeping matters. We have turned on the closed captioning for those who would like to see it. And if the chat interferes with the closed captioning, you can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen. There are a number of options. You can pop out the chat, or you can also perhaps turn off the chat. So it's up to you. Secondly, all the speakers will speak for about between about 10 to 12 minutes, and we will hopefully finish by the presentations by 9:30 and then have a question and answer session. So, okay. Having said that, let's go on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Xin Yuzhou, pardon my pronunciation. And Yuzhou is a member of the Young Communist League in Beijing. So please go ahead.
Good evening, or should I say good morning to all. And I'm Xin Yuzhou from the Bureau for North American, Oceanian, and Nordic Affairs of the International Department of the CPC. It is such an honor for me to join you and exchange ideas with friends from around the world. As a young probationary party member of our Bureau's party branch, I would like to share with you why Communist Manifesto still matters today and what our Chinese young people can learn from it. First, let's talk about the importance of Communist Manifesto. When presiding over a group study session of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee of the CPC, General Secretary Xi Jinping stressed the importance of Communist Manifesto, saying that reviewing Communist Manifesto is to understand and grasp the power of the truth of Marxism, write a new chapter of socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era, firm up Marxist belief, and trace back to the source of theories for a Marxist party to maintain the advanced nature and purity. The CPC is a loyal inheritor of the spirit of Communist Manifesto. General Secretary Xi Jinping said that it is necessary to apply the scientific principles and the spirit of the Communist Manifesto to the overall planning of activities related to the great struggle, great project, great cause, and great dream, calling Communist Manifesto a monumental work that has a scientific perspective on the development of human society and was written to benefit the people and seek liberation for humanity. He also called for efforts to further study and interpret the works of Marxism, popularize them, and have them embraced by hundreds of millions of people. More efforts should be made to develop Marxism in the 21st century and in contemporary China, and write a new chapter of adapting Marxism to the Chinese context. It has been 175 years since the publication of Communist Manifesto, during which time great changes have occurred in human society. However, on the whole, the general principles which Marxism sets forth are still entirely valid. We need to uphold the worldviews and methodologies of dialectical and historical materialism, as well as the Marxist stance, viewpoint, and methodology. Furthermore, we should apply Marxist views on the materiality of the world and the law governing its development, the natural and historic significance of social development, and related laws, human emancipations, the full and free development of every individual, and the very essence of knowledge and its development. Then let's move on to the encouragement to the young people, especially for my generation. As communists, we must take reading Marxist classics and understanding Marxist principles as a way of life.
Sorry, Yujo, you've become muted. Would you be okay to unmute? For the last maybe 10 seconds, you were muted.
Okay.
Thanks, Carlos. And I should also say that I mistakenly muted him because I was trying to mute somebody who was unmuted. If you are not speaking, please keep yourself muted. Otherwise, it's very difficult to control this. So yes, please, Yujo, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll proceed. About the encouragement of the young generation. As communists, we must take reading Marxist classics and understanding Marxist principles as a way of life and an intellectual pursuit, and apply the classics to foster our integrity, temper our way of thinking, broaden our horizon, and guide our practice. And this is particularly true to our young people. For example, there is a reading club in our bureau where we can regularly share our thoughts on books we recently read. And some young colleagues of mine recommend Communist Manifesto and invited us to share our views on it. And I believe all these can be concluded as follows. First, we should learn theories with a radical approach. Engels once pointed out that Marx's whole way of thinking is not so much a doctrine as a method. It provides not so much ready-made dogmas as aids to further investigation and the method for such investigation. He also noted that theories are a historical product which at different times assumes very different forms and deal with very different contents. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that communism is not a fixed dogma. If we look at the case in China, all these sweeping social changes that China is undergoing are not simply the extension of China's historical or cultural experiences, or the reputation of socialist practices of other countries, or the duplication of modernization endeavors elsewhere. Nor can they be readily slotted into the template devised by earlier writers of Marxist classics. So there is no orthodox, fixed version of communism. A blueprint will become a bright reality only when we combine the basic principles of communism with China's reality, historical and cultural traditions, and contemporary needs, and constantly analyze and summarize the lessons gained from our practice. Second, we should keep theories relevant with the times. The lifeline of a theory lies in innovation, and it is a sacred duty of Chinese communists to develop Marxism. We need to use Marxism to observe and understand the world today and develop it in dynamic and abundant practice in contemporary China. We should learn from all the achievements of human civilization with an extensive view. To outdo ourselves, we need to protect our foundations while innovating and learning widely from the strength of others to improve ourselves. And finally, we need to have a deeper understanding of governance by a communist party, the development of socialism, and the evolution of human society, and open up new prospects for the development of Marxism in contemporary China and in the 21st century. Third, we should translate theories into real practice and real actions. We need to study these in a thorough, consistent, and assiduous way, and apply them to problem reality, so as to better transfer such ideas and theories into a material force for understanding and changing the world. Back in February 1848, Marxism emerged as if a lightning cut through dark sky, and decades later, we still see it as a glorious dawn in human spiritual history and a spiritual home for communists. Chinese young communists today can still learn a lot from and be inspired by Communist Manifesto. So I believe it is our duty to carry on the spirits and make it enduring with the times. So that's basically the points I want to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Cheng. That was really great and very inspiring. Our next speaker will be Frank Chapman. Frank is a community organizer, executive director of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, field organizer of the Chicago Alliance Against Political Repression, and part of the Central Committee of Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Frank is also a published writer with articles in Truth Out and Freedom Ways. He is the author of Marxist-Leninist Perspective on Black Liberation, and in 2019, he also published a memoir called The Damned Don't Cry, Pages from the Life of a Black Prisoner and Organizer. We're very honored to have you, Frank, and please have the floor.
Thank you, comrade. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, comrades. I want to thank you for organizing this commemoration and celebration of the 175th anniversary of the publication of the Communist Manifesto. The opening line of the manifesto is, "A specter is haunting Europe." The manifesto was a declaration that socialism is a political movement and one based on science. We can say that as of May 30th, 2020, the launching of the George Floyd rebellion, there is a specter haunting the US, the specter of a socialist working class movement, the specter of a class struggle with revolutionary political content. According to a study by the New York Times, between 16 and 25 million people took part in protests in the month following May 25th, the day George Floyd was murdered. This makes the rebellion the largest Black-led wave of protests in US history and one of the largest waves of protests in world history. Today, for the first time in 50 years, a class-conscious movement, including communists, class struggle unionists, and a working class-led Black liberation movement, is coming together here in the United States. The basic content for us is the accelerated decline of imperialism. The biggest event was the 2008 economic crisis, which saw the greatest transfer of wealth from workers to the billionaires and bankers in world history. The heaviest toll was on Black and Latino working class families, which saw generations of wealth wiped out in the form of millions losing their homes. the entire multinational working class has suffered. The George Floyd Rebellion was spontaneous, but like all spontaneous motion, it had cores in the cities. That core first emerged during the Black Lives Matter movement, which was in response to the rebellion in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. The main organization in the 2020 rebellion was the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which was born in 1973 out of the campaign to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. It was refounded in 2019, and on May 30th, 2020, we had 23 cities where our call for a national day of protest brought 100,000 people onto the streets. We protested not just the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. We also raised the demand for community control of the police. This democratic demand has been raised from one or another, in one form or another, by the Black liberation struggle since the period of Black Reconstruction that followed in the wake of the U.S. Civil War. Every organization in the Black freedom struggle has raised the need for democratic oversight of the police departments, which are an occupying army in the Black and Latino communities. Most famously, the slogan, "Community Control of the Police," was raised by Bobby Seale, chairman of the Black Panther Party in 1968. The vast majority of the protesters and rebels in 2020 were workers. Does a socialist consciousness prevail among those in the rebellion? No. But the consciousness that emerged had two popular expressions. Since Occupy Wall Street protest in 2011 against the bailout of the banks following the 2008 crisis, the idea that there is 1% and 99% in the US has mass acceptance. Among the multinational working class, there is a renewed militancy. This shapes everything, including the current upsurge of the communist movement. Not since the 1960s and early 1970s have so many young people sought to join communist organizations. The other expression emerged with the Black Lives Matter movement. The young people in Ferguson stood up to police violence, tear gas, rubber bullets, and batons. A popular chant was, "Who do you serve? Who do you protect?" This was in reference to the slogan, "To serve and protect," that most police departments across the country have as their motto. Many police cars have this inscribed on their door. Finally, I want to speak about the science that guides our movement. In 2022, Frizzo published my book, Marxist-Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism, which is available for purchase online. When I joined the communist movement, I was taught that our role was not to be tail lights, but headlights. That is, we're not simply recording the deeds of the class struggle, but providing direction, or we're not following the tail of spontaneous uprisings. We want to lead our people out of their frustration, not into it. We start by recognizing the national character of the Black struggle. We live in the age of imperialism, where oppressed nations throughout the world are fighting and striving for their right to self-determination. The Black liberation struggle in the United States is a part of that struggle. And so there are two historic revolutionary movements in the US, not just one. Not just the socialist movement, but the Black liberation movement as well. Through the application of the science of Marxism and Leninism, you have to see that our history demonstrates that if you're going to have a successful movement for socialism in this country, it has to be united with the struggle for Black liberation. Marx said it back during the time of the Civil War. Labor in a white skin cannot be free if it is sold and branded in a black skin. This is a fundamental cleavage in the working class that impedes the development of revolutionary consciousness, that prevents a mature movement to develop that can overthrow capitalism. Communists in the United States proved in the 1930s by going into the Deep South, where you had Jim Crow states ruling with terror and brute force over Black people. They organized Black and white workers in a united fight against capitalist bosses and the landlords. That demonstrated, number one, that Black and white unity could be forged in the dirt and blood of class struggle. Number two, once that kind of unity was achieved, the Black liberation movement and the working class movement were unstoppable. They proved that in the 1930s with one victory after another. This showed us the importance of the strategic alliance between Black people and the labor movement. What happened here in Chicago with the recent election for Democratic oversight of the Chicago Police Department is an example of the strategic alliance. The movement for community control of the police, led by the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, could not have passed the legislation to create democratic oversight without the support of the labor movement. It was the labor unions led by Black presidents that delivered the final blow for us, that brought the victory home. We're benefiting today by building on the experience of the communist movement in the 30s, by using the same strategy and tactics that were successful then, proven in the dirt and blood of battle, they can be successful now. The key element in the immersion of the socialist movement and the Black liberation movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frank. That was really great and very inspiring. Our next speaker will be Sarah Flounders, and Sarah is unfortunately in Nicaragua without a good connection, so she took the precaution of sending a video which we will play for you. But let me introduce her first. Sarah, as many of you will know, is a long-standing political activist and author based in New York City. She is a contributing editor of the Workers' World newspaper and a leader of the United National Anti-War Coalition, the International Action Center, and the Sanctions Kill campaign. She is the co-author and editor of numerous books, including Capitalism on a Ventilator, The Impact of COVID-19 in China and the US, which she co-authored with Lee Siu-hin, and the recently released Sanctions, A Wrecking Ball in a Global Economy. So please, can we have Sarah's video? Thanks.
Communist Manifesto never gets old. It challenges each generation of the expropriated and oppressed. It's the most popular book printed, a bestseller for 175 years in every language. This is a living document of propaganda, agitation, and liberation. And thank you to the organizers of today's webinar for this discussion of an ever-changing working class. 175 years ago, the proletariat was tiny, a few million workers in abject poverty in mines and mills, child workers in Manchester, New York City, slaughterhouses in Chicago, new mills in Paris, Berlin, digging canals, laying railroad tracks, without any rights, any organization. Was the enslaved Africans in giant plantations, enriching the early capitalists, the most violent forms of capital accumulation. 175 years ago, in 1848, in a revolutionary upheaval, this new emerging class was just beginning to make its own demands. The Communist Manifesto was its opening declaration. Today, the proletariat is billions strong. The working class is still changing, still developing its organizational capacity. Each new preface of the Communist Manifesto in Marx and then in Engels' lifetime, up to 1890, each preface dealt with the explosive growth and changing conditions of the working class. Today, the working class, just in China, is numerically stronger than the working class of the US and all of Europe combined. Workers in China today are far more organized. They're overwhelmingly unionized in state-owned and in collectively owned and in capitalist-owned industries. The Communist Party of China, a workers' party, is 96 million members strong. So there's big changes that have happened in our class. The Communist Manifesto is loved and quoted because it defines the revolutionary role of this emerging class. It analyzes the rise of the bourgeoisie, the role of the exploitation of labor, and its inevitable defeat by the new class that capital has ruthlessly created. It's a document of revolutionary optimism with a solid scientific basis for its optimism. It gives a history of class struggle on a global basis to be realized, embraced, and owned. This epic's distinctive feature, Marx explained, is the class antagonisms are now simplified. Society as a whole is split into two great hostile camps, two great camps directly facing each other. The working class would grow into the dominant class on a world basis, and the capitalist class would consolidate, concentrate its wealth into fewer and fewer hands, smaller, wealthier. But who could have pictured that the consolidation of wealth would be into a mere handful of multi-billionaires, while there's the greatest poverty in human history? Even UN figures confirm the largest gap ever between the super rich and the overwhelming majority. Let's look back at history. The spirit of internationalism, solidarity, emerging class consciousness among all workers led to the first international workers' organization. The early workers' movement grew rapidly. It built major unions, daily workers' publications, seats in parliaments all over Europe. Workers of all countries unite was the prevailing view. But as we know, that spirit of internationalism was smashed by imperialist war, by World War I. Working class leaders in every country surrendered to chauvinism. They went along with the imperialist war. They sided with their own bourgeoisie. Internationalism was reborn in the Russian Revolution just a few years later. It was reborn because a handful of communists, led by Lenin, resisted the imperialist war. They placed their confidence in the explosive change they knew was coming. That terrible historic betrayal of the working class leaders in World War I and that revolutionary revival of communist internationalism in the Russian Revolution is a challenge we face once again today. And we can be even more confident that this emerging imperialist war against both Russia and the People's Republic of China will have explosive results in workers' movements internationally. Who will resist and who will go along? The NATO military alliance and the emerging imperialist war will bring ruin. Now, there's so many changes in 175 years, but the working class is still the decisive force. The working class is changing radically by technology, by communication, by a globalized economy. It's more centralized and in communication all around the world. Just a few years ago, we were told that the big industrial centers were a thing of the past, that the working class was now dispersed, separated. But actually, it's in greater contact than any time in the past and more centralized. The working class of today is far more aware of itself because of the communications technology. What Starbucks worker doesn't know that there aren't thousands of other Starbucks workers and other fast food and chain and service workers increasingly in contact and organizing and able to be in contact? We need to look at these developments in technology and in our ability to organize. Revolutionary forces, those who are the most struggle-oriented, must find each other. What is desperately needed is a revival of a worldwide working class movement, a revolutionary movement that has a perspective of socialist revolution. We may be geographically separated and separated by a lot of things, but we are still dependent on each other. Workers in China, in Canada, in Europe, and in Russia, throughout Africa, Latin America, are links in a chain. Now, Marx and Engels explained in the Communist Manifesto that capitalism would bring new conditions of oppression and new forms of struggle. We have to expand our view of the working class to be far more inclusive and intervene to defend and organize the most oppressed sections of our class. Migrants in millions globally are intentionally kept unorganized, temporary, transient. Prisoners are the most exploited. Slave labor, yes, a population of over 2 million in the US and millions more on probation, parole, every moment of their life controlled. Workers include sex workers and LGBTQ youth who are part of our class that must be actively defended. There are millions of people with disabilities who are part of the working class but find it difficult to even sell their labor. All of this means reviving the communist slogan proposed by Marx in deciding who is owed what. That famous slogan, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. We need to fight the chauvinism, the bigotry that's pumped into our class that keeps us divided, the fragmentation, the backwardness, the sectarianism. To a large extent, it stems from years, sometimes decades, of setbacks and defeats. Today, we especially need to build revolutionary class unity on the basis of opposing US imperialist wars, wars for profit, wars for markets. Today, if we look at the sanctioned countries, more than 40 countries, a third of the world population, each country's national security is considered a national security threat to the United States. What on earth does that mean? It means that they're willing to do just as they did in the earliest days of capitalism, starve down entire countries, destroy them, try to root them out, do everything they can to bring down the working class, to destroy their markets and their resources. But each of these 40 countries have a working class that is determined to resist. So look at the world in a new way. The US may have the largest military death machine in history, larger than the rest of the world put together. And using the NATO death machine, it's attempting now to smash the global market that capitalism so ruthlessly created. But it's finding it's not all powerful. Countries around the world have options. The productive capacity of China, the GDP is set to exceed the United States. There's trillions of dollars of Belt and Road programs that are a new lease on life for workers resisting total domination by imperialism. There's new markets, new currencies, new exchanges that are opening. And each of these are against and opposed and reorganizing against a dying system. Even small Nicaragua is considered a threat to US imperialism. Why? Because any and every show of solidarity, of unity among workers and peasants, every collective effort is a threat to imperialism. So the struggle is ever new. New developments take a scientific approach and a struggle-oriented approach. Today, the United States is making every effort to destroy the global market they created because it's slipping out of their control. And in the face of this, we need revolutionary solidarity, cooperation, resistance. We need socialism, not capitalist chaos. A better world is in birth.
Wow, thank you. Thanks very much to Sarah, who unfortunately couldn't be here, but we have just heard from her the quiet and very thoughtful reflections of a lifetime of activism, of revolutionary activism. So thank you very much, Sarah. Our next speaker is John Riddell. John is a member of the International Manifesto Group and a founding director of the Comintern Publishing Project. John has edited a whole lot of the early Comintern's papers. So we are very pleased to hear from you, John. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Radhika. It's wonderful to speak to so many fine comrades around the world today. Well, the theme today is the slogan of the Communist Manifesto, "Workers of the world unite." This celebrated call, first voiced by Marx and Engels almost 2 centuries ago, continues today to resound in the struggles of working people worldwide seeking political and social liberation. However, the Communist Manifesto's appeal was heard at first only in Europe and European settlements overseas. Only following the Russian Revolution of 1917 did the manifesto's call for universal workers' unity gain global resonance. The principles of the Communist Manifesto and the Russian Revolution found expression initially in the struggle to defend the newly formed Soviet Republic from a host of invading anti-Soviet armies, including, unfortunately, a contingent from Canada. The Soviet Republic's defenders also included about 50,000 Chinese workers resident in Russia, who joined the Red Army to defend the Russian Soviet Republic. 2 years later, in 1919, the Communist International was launched as the vehicle to unite working people worldwide and, pardon me, and carry the message of the Communist Manifesto to every continent. The following year, the Communist International rallied 2,000 delegates from Central Asia and the Middle East at a historic congress convened in Baku, Azerbaijan in 1920. The International set its strategic goal, as has been pointed out by our colleague Cheng Enfu, as nothing less than, quote, the overthrow of international capital and the establishment of workers' power throughout the world. This goal was elaborated in the appeal of the 1920 Baku Congress to all victims of colonialism the world over to join the struggle for complete equality of all peoples and races, whatever language they may speak, whatever the color of their skin, and whatever the religion they profess. The Congress called for, and I quote again, liberation of all humanity from the yoke of capitalist and imperialist slavery, for the ending of all forms of oppression of one people by another, and all forms of exploitation, end quote. The Baku Congress rallied close to 2,000 delegates, mostly from the Mideast and Central Asia, including a recorded 8 Chinese participants. A subsequent gathering of delegates from the Far East and Central Asia included no less than 42 Chinese delegates and was convened by the Communist International in 1922. 3 years later, imperialist military forces stationed in Shanghai unleashed murderous gunfire against Chinese anti-colonial demonstrators. Horror at this colonialist atrocity spread not only in China, but throughout Russia, Europe, and beyond. In response, a solidarity movement sprang up in several continents. The resulting Hands Off China campaign resounded worldwide. It was coordinated by a solidarity organization called International Red Aid, led by members of the Communist International. Material aid and funds were gathered and sent to the embattled people of China. The central leader of Red Aid, the German communist Willy Münzenberg, declared its goal in these words: "We want to form a holy alliance. We, the white, yellow, black, and differently colored underdogs, for the liberation of all those who suffered." Workers' meetings in Europe were addressed by Chinese socialists, while in Beijing, a historic rally of 100,000 Chinese workers greeted a European socialist speaker with passionate enthusiasm. In this manner, the central concept of the Communist Manifesto, "Workers of the world unite," won an expanded audience on a global scale. Historians Enfu Cheng and Jun Wang have drawn our attention to the underlying principle of this internationalism, namely that, and I quote, "The interests of the proletarian struggle in any one country should be subordinated to the interests of that struggle on a worldwide scale." And that, I quote again, "A nation which is achieving victory over the bourgeoisie should be able and willing to make the greatest national sacrifices for the overthrow of international capital." As these historians have pointed out, the application of this internationalist principle by the Communist International was marked by some missteps and errors. Nonetheless, in fact, the Communist International provided material support in various forms, as well as systematic, theoretical, and strategic guidance to the Chinese Revolution. The ideas of the Communist Manifesto live on today, finding expression in struggles against oppression and for liberation in every country, and on every continent. It is a joy for us all to join together today in giving expression to the core ideas of communism's great manifesto. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. That was really a very fine and detailed reminder of the contemporary relevance and the contemporary forms that internationalism must take. Thank you so much. We now move to our final two speakers. The next speaker is Brian Becker. Brian is the national coordinator of the Answer Coalition. He is a co-founder of and a central organizer in the Party of Socialism and Liberation, and is also the host of the Socialist program on Breakthrough News. So Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Radhika. And I want to thank all of the other speakers and contributors and panelists who have joined us today on this very, very important anniversary. We have to remember the more important moments in our own history, in the history of socialism and communism and Marxism, and certainly the publication of the manifesto is one of them. I think maybe I won't try to repeat what other speakers have said. And I want to address myself, in fact, to the people who are new to communism and maybe new to the manifesto and new such that they've never read the manifesto. And I'm hoping that there's some part of our audience that's part of that category of people. I want to say that communists read the Communist Manifesto in a way that's far different than, say, the way Christians read the Bible or Muslims read the Quran. We Marxists don't approach Marxist texts as the word, as the final word, as a word fixed in stone, as those who are reading religious texts might do so. In fact, in order to understand Marxism and in order to understand the works of Marxism, at least perhaps with the exception of Capital, it's very, very important for the reader to understand the historical moment in which the text is written, the historical context for the text. And we must read the Communist Manifesto as a historical document, not as a religious tract, but as a historical document. And as such, elements of the manifesto later by Marxists who subscribe to the basic tenets and principles of the manifesto would certainly amend parts of the descriptions offered by Marx and Engels in the manifesto. And Marx and Engels did that themselves. The prefaces are very important to read. The preface of 1872, after the experience of the Paris Commune, Marx and Engels both say that the experience of the working class in Paris, the creation of the first worker state, informs the movement about something that the manifesto could not yet teach the movement, which was how would the working class actually recreate, reorganize society. And Marx and Engels in the 1872 preface say that we learn from the experience of the commune that the working class cannot lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and use it for its own purposes, that the state must be smashed and a new state based on a new class power erected. That's extremely important for the readers of the manifesto, because the manifesto says the new society will be created by the exercise of political supremacy by the proletariat, as opposed to the bourgeoisie or the old landowning classes, the nobility. But how that will happen is not described, because there's no experience on which the manifesto writers, Marx and Engels, could actually premise their conclusion. The theory of Marxism has to be understood as the experiences of the working class and of the class struggle and its complete complexity, then generalized. In other words, not a pie in the sky, not utopian schemes, but based and premised on the experiences of the working class. The manifesto in 1848 says a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. But by 1852, after the defeat of the 1848 revolution and the Cologne trial of 1852, where all of the people in the Communist League are put on trial, those who are available to be arrested and sent to the fortress, it appears as if the specter has been sort of extinguished in Europe. There is no communism. Communism is gone. And yet it slowly comes back to the surface. And in 1864, when Marx helps form the first International, the International is formed based on the needs of the working class in 1864, but politically at a much lower level than that which was prescribed in the manifesto in 1848. My point is that the document itself is impacted by the class struggle. The experiences of the class struggle have to then be generalized or regeneralized so that there can be amendments made to these basic Marxist texts. And whenever there's a counter-revolutionary advance, whenever the working class and progressive forces are pushed back, the manifesto seems to be extinguished. And after the defeat of the Paris Commune, the socialist parties start in Europe in particular. The manifesto starts to become popular again. In 1917, when the Russian Revolution, as other speakers have mentioned, succeeds and the working class not only takes power, but retains state power and starts the path of reconstructing socialism and proclaims that it's not only fighting for itself, but for the liberation of the colonies and the semi-colonies and the people who were the principal targets and victims of imperialism, the Communist Manifesto evolves from a document that's read by the workers of Europe to the workers in Asia and the workers in Africa and the workers in the Middle East. Communism becomes a global idea of liberation. And after the Russian Revolution has allies created by the extension of revolution after World War II, where you have the People's Republic of China and DPRK and North Vietnam, not to mention the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, the manifesto is truly a global document. And then there's the counter-revolution that overthrows the Soviet Union and the socialist camp in 1991, and the bourgeoisie proclaims the end of history, and no one cares about the manifesto. And here we are 30 years later, as the revolutionary movement, the working class movement, the progressive movement, the anti-imperialist movement revives. Again, the interest in the Communist Manifesto takes off. In where I am in the United States, in our party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, tens of thousands of young, mostly young people have applied to join our party just in the last few years. When we started the party in 2004, we were a handful. And 10 years later, we were still a handful. But now there is a mass interest in socialism. For Frank Chapman said it well, there was Occupy movement after the economic meltdown on Wall Street in 2008 and 9, the Black liberation reemergence through the Black Lives Matter in 2014, the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, in spite of all of the contradictions and complexities of who Sanders is, and then the uprising against racism in 2020, there's this huge revival in socialism and interest in communism, and now the manifesto is popular once again. And so we read the document as a historical document. How would we amend the document? Well, for one, the manifesto has a Europe-centric, not a Eurocentric, but a focus on Europe, on the class struggle in Europe in 1848. There is the colonial struggle, which really becomes paramount and dominant later. Marx said that the class contradictions are breaking down into the collision between two basic class camps, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. I think we would amend that. The peasantry, of course, is still a massive, in terms of population on the globe, the peasantry, huge part of the global population. And to some extent in the metropoles within the United States and perhaps Europe, which I'm less familiar with, the middle class, the petty bourgeoisie, certainly has been stimulated and continues to exist as a major force in politics. So I would say that we would have to do some additional scientific investigation on class formations. But in general, the most important part of the manifesto is the idea that as all of history, as Marx and Engels opened the manifesto, at least since the end of primary communism, since the beginning of class society, all of that history is the history of class struggle. And that socialism and the better world that is possible and can be made to happen will come about not by the utopian schemes of philosophers, but by the class struggle of the exploited and oppressed themselves. That's the most important lesson, the opening of the manifesto. And we believe in that 100%. And we believe that the contradictions of capitalism that are not going away simply because of the emergence of unipolar power in 1991, the problems of global war, which is accelerating the problem of climate catastrophe, the issue of AI and technology within the confines of capitalist property relations will lead to revolutionary crisis and are, in fact. Finally, on March 18th, on the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, we are mobilizing here in the United States and in Washington, D.C. and in other cities for what we hope will be a major protest. The protest will be against imperialism, against the war, the proxy war against Russia, against the developing war drive against the People's Republic of China, against the sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba, against the constant funding of the Israeli racist apartheid state's war against the Palestinian people. In other words, we are trying to show that the class struggle isn't simply the struggle for better wages and better benefits, for better jobs and better working conditions, for better homes. All of that is so critically important. but it's also the struggle for international solidarity against war and for peace, which means to oppose the biggest danger, the biggest purveyor of violence in the world, as Dr. Martin Luther King said in 1967. And that, of course, is US imperialism, the leader of the global camp of capitalists. So the class struggle goes on. It takes different forms. It includes, most importantly, the idea of international solidarity, that we indeed have something in common with each other, opposition to imperialism and capitalism. And socialism represents the prospect, the possibility that we can build together a new world. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. That was really powerful. Thank you for addressing the young people and those who may not have read the manifesto. Thank you for addressing the historically evolving relevance of the manifesto. And above all, thanks for emphasizing the importance of history and experience, which was what separates Marxism and radical thinking from the vacuous abstractions of mainstream thinking. So that's really great. Finally, we move to our final speaker. And I should say it's particularly fitting that it is somebody from Russia, since, of course, the Russians, as Brian just mentioned, made the first revolution in which the bourgeoisie, in which the working class did not lose power, but kept it against great odds. Professor Alexander Buzgalin is professor of economics at Moscow State University and coordinator of the organization Alternatives. He was a member of the organizing committee of the Second Russian Social Forum. His work focuses on problems of Marxism's actuality under current conditions and the resulting challenges for left movements. Sasha, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, friends. It's a big honor for me to speak with you, to discuss with you really fundamental question. Communist Manifesto is not simply a historical document. This is fundamental document which began the whole epoch of communist struggle. And this struggle was not simple. People were reading Communist Manifesto in prisons. They were making quotations from Communist Manifesto when they were dying for communism. People were reading Communist Manifesto in all countries of the world, and it was sometimes heroic decision to read this book because you can be punished, and maybe you are still in the same situation in some countries. So this is a revolutionary document. Ideologically, philosophically, emotionally. And it was question what to read if you don't read Manifesto. You must read Manifesto. It's the book, small book written by two young guys, 30 years old. Marx, Engels was even younger. Who can read such document among our young generation? And I can say you must write such document, Manifesto of the 21st century. It's not the task for those who are 60, 70, 80. And this is not joke. This is very young document. We celebrate 175th anniversary, but this document is very young. To say that conflict of proletariat, contradiction of proletariat and bourgeoisie is main conflict of the epoch. To say this, you must be brave now because there are a lot of words about everything, but this conflict is fundamental. And if you are member of the middle class family, you have house, you have money, you have car, for you this question, this contradiction may be not very important. But for billions of people in the world, including Russia, this is extremely important, vital question. When you're coming to the factory and you have $300 per month, from which you must pay 100 for rent of poor apartment, and you see in other part of the city, person who has $300,000 per day, this conflict is visible. That's why it is fundamental question. Second fundamental question of manifesto, internationalism. This problem became the most urgent actual problem during 20th century of the wars, 2 world wars, local, so-called local wars, but in Vietnam, only in Vietnam, 10 million people were victims of this local war. We have the same now. And the request for internationalism, international struggle for peace, international anti-fascist struggle, real unity of the different nations is very important. In my country, in Russia, there are a lot of words about so-called good nationalism, good statism, good imperialism. In the United States, as I know, in many countries of the West, nationalism also is their slogan. That's why internationalism now became extremely big question for everybody in everyday life. This is only 2 points. Methodological aspect of manifesto. To analyze both positive potential, limits of this positive potential, and contradictions of capitalism. It is very important. And maybe final aspect which I want to stress, which is extremely actual now, critique of feudal socialism. I don't know about States and Canada, maybe Western European countries, but in Russia and many other countries of the world, we have rebirth of feudalism or maybe even Asian model or mode of production. Hopes, dreams about monarchy, about new aristocracy, determination of the people, not only economic, but also administrative determination of people. Semi-slavery, this is new reality of the world. Struggle for territories, not only for financial power. We have this critique of neoliberalism from the past, especially in such countries as Russia. We are criticizing neoliberal model of capitalism, and this is extremely important critique. But from the point of view of feudal Russian monarchy, system of values of this monarchy, and so on, clericalism. You can take every page of manifesto and see it is actual. Sometimes I must say, unfortunately actual. Because after 175 years, we have similar problems and similar threats. Of course, there are a lot of points which are not described in this small text. Only 50 pages, I don't know, you cannot describe everything in this such a text. But main genetic, basic, fundamental aspects of the struggle for new society are in this document. And a few words about post-Soviet history of manifesto. After collapse of the world socialist system, the Soviet Union, there were a lot of words about death of communism, but I remember it was one of the main events in my life. I remember celebration of 150th anniversary of manifesto in Paris. It was a huge event, I cannot say even conference event, in Mitterrand Library. It was not enough space along the Seine. We had a lot of boats where panels took place. Final plenary was in Sorbonne, in main hall of Sorbonne, of university, main university of Paris, France, of maybe world. And enormous amount of fighters, intellectuals from all countries of the world. That's why it is not simply 50 pages written by young persons. This is the event and the challenge. The challenge because we must have new manifesto. It will be continuation, critic development, creative development of Marx and Engels' work, but we need new manifesto. And I don't know who will be these 1, 2, 3 genius persons, men, women, girls, boys, who will write this. but such document is necessary. And we have, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. And we have many important ideas, theoretical, methodological, practical, for finalizing these documents in such a document, new manifesto of the 21st century. And I think it will be written, maybe not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. That was really very important. I think you highlighted the worldwide and continuing relevance of the manifesto, how to read it, how to read different parts of it. And of course, in the end, you talked about the relevance of it to the Soviet Union. So thank you very much. We can now open for questions and answers and discussion. While you're thinking about some questions, let me just say that I'm sharing the webpage of the International Manifesto Group in the chat for those of you who may not be familiar with it. So please check it out. We have a manifesto which you can consider signing. You can volunteer if you like the work that we do. You can donate if you like the work that we do. And generally look at what we've done in the past as well as the activities of the Manifesto Group, which started when the pandemic started, actually, in 2020. Please, if you wish to raise questions, I can see Helmut, Harry, you have a question. Why don't you put it yourself? If you would raise your hand, I will recognize you. Are there anyone else? Please use the raise hand function to raise your hand. And I can then recognize people who have questions. While we are waiting, I will put a question that our comrade Yuri Smuter has asked me to place because he's too unwell to ask them himself. He has two questions. So he says, I have two questions and anyone in the panel can answer it, which is, and they are this: is it long overdue that we in the West abandon anti-communist leftism, especially the current left in Eastern European region, as well as in Russia and former USSR countries? And his his second question is, what will it take for much of the US left, from the white workers movement to the Black left to the Latino left, feminist, queer, liberationist left, and the eco-left, to show urgent solidarity to the plight of Indigenous Americans and Indigenous Hawaiians and Alaskans? So those are the two questions that have already been posed. Are there any others? We can take a couple of questions at a time. If not, while we wait, does anybody in the panel, is there anyone in the panel who would like to address these questions or has another, has some comments to make? Okay, I have a question, I think, from Jacqueline Reinel. Please go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry I got in late because of the time. I got confused. But I was wondering if any of the speakers did go over the need of a civil war, or not perhaps the need, but I think Marx and Engels clearly state that revolution is the way to solve class struggle, the taking over of working people of the entire power, not just the government, not just certain institutions, but the whole thing, and doing what needs to be done with the means of production. So I was wondering, because nowadays, we don't talk anymore about revolution. We talk about like, as if a revolution wouldn't be a civil war where the two classes or all the layers within the two classes are really confronting each other. So my question is, how is your take about what is happening today, for instance, in Latin America, which of course I like what is happening, but at the same time is very concerning, like in Venezuela, Bolivia, with Rafael Correa in Ecuador. What well, you can name all those tendencies that are taking place now, where revolution as we knew it is really not in question. And I see that more as a social democratic reform process. And I just was wondering about what people think about it.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. I have a question from Kim, and then I'll go to Sasha. So Kim, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for this very interesting discussion. I was particularly intrigued by what Brian said about what Marx talks about smashing the bourgeois state. My concern is if you look at what I call Western left and even the so-called left in the United States, many people are still very much, I would say, in love with the system, right, with the state. How many of us truly see the US state as the enemy of the people, right? In other words, people always talk about policy changes, elect the right people, etc. That to me is part of this opportunism that I see in the progressive or the liberal left. And I just want to throw that out because I think that idea of smashing the state, I know that violence is kind of hard because of the strength of the military machine, but it's just a concept and an ideological state of mind that people, I feel here, the left in the US and the Western world don't have. So I just kind of wanted to have your comments on that or any of the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I think I have one more question from Kenneth Morgan, but I'll wait for the next round. Sasha, would you please give your response, any response that you like, and maybe then Brian can address what Kim said, and then if there are no more panelists who want to speak, we will go to the next round of questions. So Sasha, please go ahead.
It was great to discuss question of revolution. I didn't mention this, and other speakers too, only briefly. But this is one of the fundamental question of manifesto. First of all, revolution is not civil war or political coup d'etat. Revolution is qualitative change in social, economic, political, cultural life. And this is not one-day process. But the question is, how can we start these qualitative changes? And this is a question which is very interconnected with question of the state. To destroy the state or to continue the same state machine functioning, and only to change a little bit to make more social, more democratic, more green, and so on. This is fundamental question. First of all, revolutions in 20th century had very often peaceful form. Soviet system had victory in 80% of regions of Russian Empire peacefully. In the autumn 1917, in Petrograd was uprising, in Moscow was fighting. But in 80% of the regions of Russia, it was peaceful victory of Soviets, of democratic organs of working people. It was peaceful revolution. Then Spain, you said nothing in Europe. No. Spain, 1936, peaceful victory of left forces. Then it was fascist coup d'etat. It's not was left struggle against people. Victory of Allende in Chile, 1970s. Modern victories of left people in different countries, including Venezuela. I was in Venezuela when in the center of Caracas took place huge demonstrations of pro-bourgeois right-wing forces sponsored by United States, not internal, by the way.
Alert from new iCloud terms and conditions.
So it is possible to have peaceful transformation, but then it is necessary to change, qualitatively change political system and their state. And if I have another 2 minutes, I will use maybe funny examples, parallel. State, in Russia, we have dragon with 3 heads and 3 mouths, very angry and hungry. So state is a dragon with 3 heads. One head is realizing interests of the society. to have not to have ecological disaster, not to have social conflicts and so on. Second head is protecting interests of the capital, and it is very angry and hungry head. And third one is protecting interests of the bureaucracy, state itself. This is also very hungry, angry, and dangerous head. So the struggle of this task of revolution is to support and develop first head, but to cut to others. This is brief comment and fun example.
Right. Thank you, Sasha. Is there anyone else who would like to respond to the first round of questions? Yes, go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
I think that that we have to contextualize the issue of revolution and violence properly, and to explain it properly. I think the working class and society in general, but especially the oppressed classes, want to do away with violence and want to have transformation in a way that's entirely peaceful. I think if you sense people, you know that the last thing people want is civil war. The last thing they want is mass violence. And as the comrade from Russia said, the 1917 revolution was a peaceful revolution for the most part, with minor casualties, until 14 imperialist armies invaded and collaborated with counter-revolutionaries from the old classes to create the Civil War. First the White Terror, then the Red Terror, which is a commensurate response to the White Terror, and millions died, and it was terrible. But the violence came from the old ruling classes' resistance to revolution. In the case of Allende, 80% in Chile in 1970, the proletariat, the working class sections of Chile, about 80% voted for the united front between the Socialist Party and the Communist Party, that front led by Allende. But it was the CIA and the generals and the military that imposed this terrible violence. And the issue of revolution or smashing the state has to do not with a preference for violence at all, but a preparation for what Lenin was making the argument, and I think correctly, that the resistance of the old ruling classes, as evidenced by their performance throughout history, whenever they are challenged, is to resort to unbridled violence, mass terror. And the only way for the revolution to succeed is to defend itself. And then what is the state? When we talk about the state, we're not talking about the government per se. We're talking about the instruments of repression from the old society. We're talking about the military of the old society, the police, the judges, the courts, the prisons. Like the new state means a new state based on a new class power. If we had a revolution in the United States, could we use the New York City Police Department, which is 50,000 strong and which routinely imposes violent repression against the people, as the agency for the imposition of radical reforms for socialism? No, they would be the enemies. So the issue of smashing the state isn't a preference for civil war. It's not a preference for violence. It's an understanding that the new order has to be defended by a new class force, and that this force is basically defensive in character, trying to support the revolution and allow its forward progress against the forces of reaction. So I don't want to put violence on a pedestal. In the case of Latin America, why is it that Venezuela and Bolivia and Ecuador and Uruguay and Honduras and Brazil and all of these countries that want to move to the left haven't really had a full going revolution? I think it's not simply because of the social democratic prejudices that might exist within the political arena, but the relationship of forces globally is such that if there's a full-scale socialist Cuban-type revolution in any of these countries, the full weight of world imperialism will come crashing down on them. And following the collapse of the socialist camp, there's no alternative. Like Cuba could not have been Cuba. In 1959, it had the socialist camp that could defend it, but it does. No one has that right now. So we're still struggling to overcome the era of counter-revolution, and that means the demands and the prospects are still limited based on the reality of the relationship of forces. Anyway, that's a mouthful, but that's how we here view it.
Yes, thank you so much, Brian. And I would simply like to add to your extremely clear clarification on these two critically important questions, that what Marx and Engels meant by the state is an instrument of class oppression. It should not be collapsed into the apparatus of the administrative apparatus, unless, of course, as Brian pointed out, the apparatus itself has been infected by the elements of the oppressive character of the state. So, yeah, because otherwise the idea of the smashing of the state is then read in a very anarchical fashion, which I don't think Marx and Engels meant. Anyhow, we go to the next round of questions, and there are already 3 hands up. But before we go to them, let me just read the question by Helmut Harry Lowen. Because his mic is not working, he says, would Radhika and Brian discuss the academic distortions of the manifesto? I'm thinking of Jacques Derrida's Spectres of Marx and the influential nonsense about the hauntologies, I suppose he means the specters stuff, that have been generated out of the book. Thank you for organizing the event. So that's Harry Helmut's question. And now we will take all the 4 questions that we have. We have one final round of answers from all the panelists, and then we should close, because one of the things we have decided is we're not going to go on for 3 hours as we often do. So I have Kenneth Morgan, then Nevosia, then I guess it will be Kumri, and then Carlos. So Kenneth, please go ahead.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. One of the things that I wanted to find out is what would be more important, although certainly the Communist Manifesto is extremely important, especially volume 1 of Das Kapital, the book, would be important. So could folks or panelists kind of make that happen in reference to the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital?
Great, thank you very much. Nevosa, please go ahead.
Draft me if I get too much of the time. So this is from the place of historical unhappy marriage of Eastern and Western Marxism, sorry. Former Yugoslavia, unhappy marriage that had to end up in a tragic divorce in Yugoslav wars, similarly to what we see in Ukraine today. What I want to say that I have to oppose strongly Alexander's notion of peaceful revolution. What peaceful revolution during the First World War? Come on, without First World War, there would be no revolution in Russia, as there would be no revolution in Yugoslavia without Second World War. Millions of people were infected, even if they were not exposed to direct destruction of the wars. They were exposed to the effects of the wars, and this is why they were into radical change. At least they were not ready to join to what Marx calls in 18 Brumaire, party of order, to support party of order and to oppose the revolutionary intentions. Why it is important? Because already in 1851, in 18 Brumaire, what Marx notices? He notices that expectations of proletariat in June uprising and February uprising in 1850 or 1849 in Paris, Marx says there was nothing more contradictory, more conflictual than the demands of proletariat as opposed to objective situation. An objective situation was the economic upsurge, economic recovery of 1848 that pleased the masses, even the huge importance, huge fractions of proletariat. So revolution is always connected to war and destruction. There's no peaceful revolution, and let's not hope about that. And the future is finding the solution for global and local division of labor, because revolution abolished proletariats, abolished working class. There's no working class after revolution. The perverse of Russian and Yugoslav revolution was that there was still working class, still middle class, still ruling class. And it was impossible to continue and maintain it. It was objectively impossible. Thank you, and sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. Kumri Gomri, please go ahead.
Hi, yes, I'm a chapter coordinator with World Beyond War, and I'm very alarmed and dismayed to hear people calling for, using words like smashing and calling for violence. And it seems to imply to me that the people that are promoting socialism are no better than the thing that they're trying to overthrow. So I don't think that violence as a response. I mean, somebody mentioned colonialism, South Africa. I know a little history. I understand that Haiti. I understand that there were situations, and there probably still are situations in the world where a smaller group is being oppressed by a colonial power, and they're being subjected. They have no. But I'm talking about this from the perspective of somebody that lives in Canada, that lives in one of these capitalist, colonial, imperialist countries. And if socialist activists were to decide to have a revolution and to employ violence as a means to an end, I can't think of anything more wrongheaded and foolish. I really can't.
Thank you.
Yeah. Read anything in World
Beyond
or listen to any of the links that I've put in there. I mean, the whole idea is just ridiculous and horrible. They have nuclear weapons almost on the edge of a nuclear war now. Do you want to have the whole world destroyed?
Okay, thank you so much. Carlos, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Radhika, and thanks so much to the speakers. I think they've all been excellent, and we've had a really interesting range of ideas from different corners of the world, which has been great. I just wanted to save everyone time by not asking a question, but instead making a quick point, which is about the connection of the anti-war and anti-imperialist struggles to the global historic struggle for communism, which we've been talking about. Samir Amin, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, said that multipolarity will provide the framework for the possible and necessary overcoming of capitalism. And what that means is that in a multipolar world, in a world without hegemony, in a world without imperialist domination, each nation, each country, each people has the choice of what path to follow, which creates a space, which creates a freedom to build socialism. Hence today, when we fight against war, when we fight against NATO, when we fight against imperialism, when we fight against the new Cold War, when we fight against the encirclement and containment of China, we're also struggling for the right of the peoples of the world to build socialism and to apply the principles of the Communist Manifesto. That's it.
That's great, Carlos. And of course, I should say that our manifesto through pluripolarity to socialism also reflects this idea, but changes the label multipolarity to pluripolarity following Hugo Chavez's preference for the latter term. But okay, so in the interest of time, I will not take a repeat question from Jacqueline, but I will take quickly one from Paul Fiondella, and then we will go to a final round of answers. So Paul, please go ahead.
Yes, lately I've been reading a great deal about the NEP and the workers' opposition and the debates that took place with regard to the demands that were put forward by the unions in the period of 1919 to 1922. And one of the things that strikes me that I don't think, other than Alexander Bugalin mentioning, is the stretch of history. The 1917 revolution in Russia was a real historical event in terms of class struggle, but it wasn't definitive the way it is often made out to be. during the period of Stalinism. And I feel that, we need to look back here at history a little more closely. And especially Alexander mentioned that what he sees going on in Russia is almost a return of monarchy, a return of feudalism. There's a fellow by the name of Varoufakis in Greece who has talked about techno-feudalism. In other words, we're in a system in the capitalist system at a point of major crisis for that system itself. And it's not clear to me that anything as definitive as the Russian Revolution is going to happen. If you look at the history of capitalism, you can go all the way back to the 12th century, to the battle between Frederick the Great in Germany and the Northern Italian Leagues. That was a battle to establish capitalism on the part of those city-states. And that's like 900 years ago. So the idea that history moves precipitously, that there are these sudden changes in the course of history, I think is one which inhibits our analysis. Now, I only mention this because of
Very briefly, please, your question.
Yes, my question is this. Why do those of you who seem to believe this still believe that the Soviet Union was a socialist country as opposed to simply a state capitalist country?
Okay, thanks very much. So who would like to start the responses from the panel, please? Brian, please go ahead.
I wasn't raising my hand.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, if there's no one else, I can say a few words, but maybe I've spoken already, so maybe somebody else wants to jump in ahead of me.
I don't think so. So maybe Brian and then Sasha.
Yeah, so real quick, I'll just say this. I think 1917 was very definitive. And it was also a turning point in certainly the 20th century. It set into motion a train of events that completely altered global politics. Very dramatically, it led to the creation of communist movements in all of the colonies and semi-colonies in areas of the world that had been dominated by imperialism. I think John Riddell talked about that, the impact of the international, that became a material factor. And after the weakening of the colonial empires because of the magnitude of the violence in World War II, those countries and peoples were able to become free people. I mean, that changed global politics. I mean, free, at least in the sense of sovereignty. And communist parties led those struggles in several parts of the world that really had a transformative impact. The other part of the statement that history is this long stretch in 900 years and, like just this sort of idea that nothing really is decisive. Well, 1789 with the French Revolution is a decisive moment. If you think it's not, you're just closing your eyes to world history, because after 1789 and 1792, you have the Haitian Revolution of 1791 that is victorious in 1804, the wars for the independence of the Americas from Spain and Portugal. This is a period that goes from 1789 until 1848, and then resumes again. These are the epic of first bourgeois political revolutions and then morph into social revolutions as the oppressed classes come into the fray. These are very decisive periods. Is it instantaneous? Is it all down to 1 year or 2 year? No, but we can certainly see a block of history where transformation has changed, and also the transformation in the relationship in the mode of production or the means of production, the revolutionizing of the means of production. All of human history, since we became a human family, the glacial development of the relationship of forces is then surpassed by this tempestuous dynamism of capitalism, which changes the globe completely. So you have the bourgeois revolution, the revolution in the means of production, and also the accompanying social revolutions. This is a very concrete period of time starting in 1789 till the present, which doesn't mean there weren't counter revolutions in between, but this is a period.
Thanks, Brian. I think I'll go to John first and then Sasha. So, John.
Yes, thank you. The question came up of the role of violence in social change. And I think the key point here, if I may repeat something of a truism, is that the democratic forces, the working people, seek to unify the immense majority to carry out change in the interests of the immense majority. That this is an essentially democratic process, but it runs up against the violent opposition of the old order. And it is dealing with that violent opposition that leads for the necessity of self-defense in the form that we saw it, for example, in the Russian Revolution and in other great social transformations. So there's a lot more to be said on that, but I think that's the essential point.
Thanks, John. Sasha.
Very brief comment on the question on Soviet Union. I don't want to discuss the question of nature of our country. It's a huge question. I will stress that I was and I am very critical about Stalinist deformations of our life, but enormous potential of social creativity of millions of people, maybe not majority, but millions of people in my country, was the reality. And it is still alive in the history and culture in many, many aspects. And the Soviet Union gave very powerful support to left movement in all over the world, with again, all contradictions. And that's why we must talk about this social creativity of masses in 20th century, including Soviet Union, or maybe with Soviet Union as a center. And not only about repressions and so on. This is first. And second, about violence. Again, peaceful democratic victory of socialist revolution is possible if social forces are strong enough. It's impossible to have victory because we have good program and we have good leaders. It's possible to have victory in the elections only if we have mass organized social movement. And if we have mass organized social movement, this will be basis for struggle against violence from the counter-revolution. But with, I don't know, big probability, counter-revolution will start violent struggle against victory of left forces, especially the situation when we have world imperialist power organizations like NATO and so on. That's why it's necessary to be ready to defend revolution. And this is quotation of Lenin, and he was right.
Well said, Sasha. Of course, the question of violence is it's very emotive and definitely deserves a lot of reflection. And I think you have made an excellent contribution to that reflection. We should bring things to a close. I will only take a brief moment to respond to Helmut Harry's question. I already discussed the distortions of Marxism in my own opening remarks and framing remarks. And I pointed out that there are, there's a Schumpeterian interpretation of the Communist Manifesto and capitalism. There is a rejection of the immiseration thesis, and there is this strange praise of Marx for a globalist, a strange sort of appropriation of Marx for the globalist cause, none of which are justified. And interestingly, they all have to do with imperialism and the refusal on the part of so many in Western countries to understand the intimate relationship between capitalism and imperialism rooted in the structures of capitalism. And I'll only add to that all this, you're quite right to draw attention to the spectralization of Marx. This is simply another way on the part of so many in academia who call themselves Marxists, who invoke Marx, but actually say that Marx is irrelevant and it's just another fashionable postmodernist way of continuing to talk about Marx while rejecting Marx in academia, which is where they're performing a great service. These sorts of statements perform a great service to the ruling class. But as all the speakers in our panel have said, and have said so well, the relevance of the manifesto from a historical point of view, from a point of view that is really about what really happens rather than what these people do in the ivory towers, and in their complicity with the structures of capitalist power. What's really happening is the movements of liberation for which the manifesto remains relevant, unfortunately, and will continue to do so until the revolutions that it called for actually start occurring around the world. They will still be a very long process, but they have to start. I just like to close this by once again reminding everybody to please take a look at our website, which I'm sharing again now. Try and please consider reading the manifesto, consider signing the manifesto, consider volunteering with us, consider working with us, send us your ideas about webinars and so on. We would love to hear from you. And once again, thanks to all the brilliant speakers. Thanks to all the audience who have stayed here in such huge numbers at the end of 2 hours. And we look forward to further webinars. We will soon be sending out announcements for the same. So thank you very much. Bye.